So, about a decade ago, I did this oral history art project talking to Ethiopian and Eritrean taxi drivers in the Bay Area. And there was this one man I met whose story just stuck to me. Let's call him Dawit. Dawit said that back in Addis Ababa, there weren't enough cars, so drivers would share a taxi and take shifts. And of course, there were never enough shifts. Eventually, Dawit moved to the Bay Area to reunite with family and started driving a taxi in Oakland, which he loved. He said, being a taxi driver here gives you independence. It's your own small business. It allows you to work as long as you want, 12 hours, 14 hours, 15, 16 hours. In other words, there was always another shift, so no one would ever tell him to stop. As a kid, I never heard these words said as explicitly as Dawit expressed, but the immigrant work ethic was literally everywhere I looked. And that work ethic, yes, it can be beautiful. Like for Dawit, he was able to save up enough money to buy a house and support his extended family. But it can also be vulnerable. A motivation to work that so often leads to exploitation, even to someone exploiting themselves. So, what happens when this kind of immigrant work ethic gets applied to art? Earlier this year, I was vibing with the incredible singer-songwriter Helado Negro's new album, Phaser. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. Another new album already? I mean, lucky us, but how many was that for him? So I checked. 13 albums in 15 years. And I was like, how is this possible? Do you know what it takes to write, record, and release an album? It is so much. Put on top of that the art installations, composing for visuals, touring, and video work that Helado Negro does. 13 albums in 15 years. And I started to wonder, so where is this wild productivity coming from? Is it a compulsion? Golden handcuffs? Or just gold? I had to ask. My name is Meklit, and this is Movement. Music and Migration Remixed. Can I ask you to introduce yourself to us however you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Helado Negro, and I'm a sound maker, song finder.
Song finder. That's interesting. Tell me about that.
Yeah. I think everybody who makes music's looking for songs, right? And I remember somebody said that to me a long time ago when she was describing art, how like all art is kind of looking for the poem. It's not literally a poem, but it's just like everything kind of is a poem once you find it and you're like, oh wow, it's just so wonderful and wondrous, you know? And it's kind of like just abstract something that's like not in your hand and kind of in your head and sometimes outside your mind when you sing it or say it.
Helado Negro, by the way, is an artist name. It translates to black ice cream. His everyday name is Roberto Carlos Lange. He is the son of Ecuadorian immigrants born and raised in immigrant communities of South Florida. Quiet life, ocean to fall, it's all gone. Helado Negro's music is like stretching out in a gently swinging hammock on a warm, breezy day. He's a crooner with a gentle, vibrato-filled voice, animating lyrics in both English and Spanish. His sound is analog with the light touch of 80s throwback. The frequencies seem like they are coming to you from underwater, and they will make you want to daydream the afternoon away. I was interested to see that the first track on his new album is really about labor. Labor as love, labor as income, labor as the need to create something new. So that's where we started our conversation, talking about a craftswoman who built legendary guitar amplifiers. I was wondering, could you tell us who was Lupe Lopez and how did you first learn about her story?
I was deep in my nerddom looking for an amplifier that I once worked with. Called the Fender Champ. It's pretty like common. It's a small little amplifier. It's really fun to use. And so I was kind of like on this trip where I was like researching, like, should I get a new one? Should I get a used one? What are the used ones like? How expensive are they? You know what I mean? I was just kind of like on this.
All the questions.
Yeah. So I stumbled upon this forum that was talking about these amps. And then there was this photo of Lupe Lopez working at the Fender manufacturing building and in like the 50s. And she's at her workbench. And she's actually building these amps. There's like 3 on the floor and there's 1 on her bench. And I just found the photo, the image is so like interesting, like cool. Guess I never really thought who was making this. And to my surprise also, like never really thought like, oh, like a Mexican American woman was making this. And
yes.
And then like being like, well, that maybe, I'm not trying to be presumptuous, but I was like, oh, maybe that was obvious, but maybe not. Because like during the 50s, like my thought was like, it's like this very like symbolic era of the United States where everything is like American made, and through my own kind of like prejudices and kind of like predisposed ideas, I was just like, oh, maybe it was just like, it wasn't people from other countries making this, it's kind of like the narrative that's drawn in your mind.
Right.
And so then, so I was like, oh, okay. So this is definitely, it became enticing like that. But then like, I was like, oh, why is everybody like fanning out on Lupe right now? Why is nerding out on Lupe? And then, they're just talking about how, because obviously that was my first take, but I was seeing that it wasn't like everybody else's take on it. Everybody else's take was like talking about her care and her touch of these amplifiers made a distinct sound and tone that was kind of sought after by people who played guitar or played sounds through these amplifiers, and through her care and focus, like this like kind of resonated over time, and still to this day, like people appreciate the amps that she built, and other people built these amps. It's like she wasn't the only person working there. There was a lot of other people, and you can read on these forums, like, there's a lot of Mexican American people who were working there, but for some reason her amps, and they knew they were her amps because on the inside for quality control, they would write Lupe and write it on a piece of tape and then put it on the inside. So like if something happened or whatever, if there was like a recall, they were like, oh, Lupe built these or whatever,
Right.
And it's what I connected with was just like, there's a lot of people that I know that I grew up with that were, that she reminded me of, I came from like a very worker family. And so, it's a job and you're doing a job because you're getting paid and you got probably kids you got to feed and rent you got to pay. So it's in that respect, it's insignificant in the grander scheme because they're probably thinking about the more important things. Like, I love my family. I want to take care of them. I'm not thinking about the solder. Like, it's not the most important thing in my life, but it's just something, it's a means to get to a richer life within, the life that I have.
The song is called LFO, Lupe Finds Oliveros. I love how the song brings together 2 very different women. Lupe is, of course, Lupe Lopez, this worker on a factory floor where her relentlessly repetitive actions produce a legendary piece of sound equipment. And Oliveros is Pauline Oliveros, who is almost a mystical sage of contemporary music. She composed for film, wrote 5 books, was a university professor, co-founded the San Francisco Tape Music Center, and she taught the world to listen via radically egalitarian workshops. LFO is not just about imagining what might have happened if Lupe and Pauline met. To me, it's also calling out these 2 sides of who Helado Negro is. He is both the worker and the sage. In a way, the song is him.
I was wondering, when you were talking about Lupe, you talked about your family as a family that was very much worker family. And I see this so much, and we all see this so much in so many folks that are steeped in immigrant communities. My parents' work ethic was like, whoa. Like, I remember my mom used to work 5 days in a row, 24-hour shifts, and she would take us to the movies. So so she could have a place where she could fall asleep.
She's like, I'm gonna keep my kids entertained while I rest.
Yes, and that's what going to the movies was. And I just wonder if you could say a little bit more, like, what was your family like?
My dad is a CNC machinist. He works with metal, like aluminum, and he builds like these like chassis or forms that go around electronics. So I would go to his shop my whole life. I would actually have to wake up at like 4 a.m. and then be at work with him at 5.
Wow.
And then lie to him and tell him that I had homework to do, so I didn't have to go like sweep the shop.
What would you do at 5 a.m. there? Did you have a role, or were you chilling and it was like he had to go to work, so you had to go too?
I had to go with him because then it was closer to like the school, so my mom didn't have to drive me that far, or my dad could, so then my dad would have somebody who worked at the shop drive me to the shop, in like the work truck, which is like this like crazy ass like chicken truck looking thing, where it's just like, pulling up to that, like as you're like a developing teenager, you're just like destroys any kind of like self-esteem you might have about like mystery of like who you might be, or you know what I mean? Everybody's just like, oh damn, this is Roberto in the chicken truck, so it was a lot of that, being there a lot in the mornings, either like working with my dad, or something he would ask me to go do. Very like nothing like intense, but just definitely like busy shit. Like he's like, oh, I need you to go clean these like 1,000 little pieces of metal. I'm just like doing that for like 2 hours or something like that before I had to go to school. And it was like, it definitely made me want to leave and go to school,
Right.
Some kind of Jedi mind trick.
It is. That is a master Jedi mind trick. Are you still a morning person?
I am. So I think he definitely embedded that into me. And that's like, it's a blessing and a curse where it's like, on tour, it really works out for me. I'm able to really get up and get myself together pretty quickly. But then it also like the curse is like sometimes like, I hit the bed at like 3 or 4 a.m. and then like my eyes are just like open at 7:30. I'm just like, boom, and I'm like, I can't go back to sleep.
Can you tell me a little bit about your own kind of work habits? Like, do you have a routine to the way you write and record music, or is it more like the process of finding the poem like you were describing before?
I think it's like always showing up first, like getting in my studio and then being motivated to do something.
Isn't that funny how showing up is so much of what it is? Just
it really is. You're like, is that it? That's all I gotta do, And you're like, yeah, that's literally all you gotta do is show up. And you're like, really? You're kind of like, you're having this like self-doubt in your head, your inner conversation, and you're like, there's gotta be more. I gotta come prepared with something. And like, no, you could literally just go to your studio and just get in there, and you don't have to have anything. You know what I mean? Like you kind of put these like internal pressures and internal dialogue, and you're like, you feel like you got to have a lot ready. You got to be like ready. And you're like, sometimes you're just not ready, and you could just go and be like, at least I went in there today.
Yes. And yet you are like wildly prolific. Is that something that suits you? Do you thrive on that kind of engine of activity?
I think so. Going back to this idea, I think it's just kind of like the worker in me. It's just like everything I've ever known comes from this idea of just like, yeah, you just gotta. I've always just done these things. I've seen everybody around me always just doing these things, not necessarily isolated, but just putting in this work. How many records are you in right now?
6 records. The 6th one will come out next year. It's 5, and then lots of little collaborations here and there. And then I'm a serial project starter and holder of containers for telling stories together with other artists that are bigger collective stories than I can tell alone.
Right.
So all of that.
And do you feel like your work in terms of like obviously I don't know your family story, but I mean, do you feel like your work is like holds on to these places as well, like moving from one place to another?
Okay, listen, this is not a Meklit interview, but fine. I'll give you
No, but
1 minute. I'll give you this.
Yeah.
The list goes Addis Ababa, Dusseldorf, Washington, D.C.,
Dusseldorf.
Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Iowa City, Iowa, Brooklyn, Jacksonville, Gainesville, Miami for just a few months, London, New Haven, Seattle, and San Francisco for almost 20 years. So
look at you.
It's all a lot. It's all a lot.
Talk about migration.
We're working out our stuff.
What I didn't say in the moment is that, yes, my work absolutely stems from having moved from one place to another. I love to jokingly say that starting over so many times was like strength training for life as a touring musician. Waking up in a new city every day, no problem. Walking into a room full of strangers and winning them over in a heartbeat, check. But it's more than that too. Being an artist is working for yourself, being your own boss. It requires harnessing a huge amount of energy to connect a dream with the methodical steps it takes to bring that vision into reality, which also just happens to fit who I am. As a child, I never sat still. I'd ask my infinitely patient mother, what are we going to do today? And after that, and after that, and what about after that? I needed to know how each day was structured, start to finish. What action would fill it? I had so much energy that the only way to manage it was to know how time would break down step by step. I'm pretty much the same way today. Which is why it also feels so good in those rare moments when I can just stop and be still.
When I listen to you singing, your voice to me feels very relaxed. And as a listener, I also find your music often feels like an invitation to slow down and like be in the world, bask in the world and observe it. Does your music have that effect on you too? Does it have that effect of inviting you to slow down?
I hope so. I don't know that when I'm making something, I have like a super literal intention to be like, this is my world slowdown track. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't mean that in like a humorous way. I mean it like literally. Like I'm not like just as I'm not writing songs in kind of a linear sense. You know, like I'm really writing a lot of things as they come in a really vertical sense. Like a lot of what I write is vertically. You know, it's I'm building layers and then I'm kind of like breaking it down into parts and then like rearranging it like that.
Got you.
So that's what I mean in terms of like it's harder for me to conceptualize like something like slowing down when I'm writing. So it's abstract to me what's happening, you know. But then when it happens, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this is different, and then I'm like, this is the same. It's like, and I've told people this before. I feel like I do feel like I've been writing the same song since the first song I wrote.
Really?
Yeah, I do think that, and I think that in the sense that like, you have a voice and then your voice changes, but your voice is always your voice. You know,
Yes.
It's like the voice somebody can always recognize through time, even though you sound a little older, you sound a little tired, you sound a little scrappier, you sound like chipper, you know, but it's still your voice. And I think that's what I think about a lot. It's just kind of something it's the same song, but it's, you know, it sounds a little bit different every time.
I asked Roberto why he feels compelled to keep writing songs when on some level we are just writing the same song over and over. And would he ever stop? He said no.
I think, honestly, just, I don't know what else to do. Like, I think you find something that you're good at in life and you really get happy about doing that thing that you're really good at.
That was Roberto Carlos Lange, who performs as Helado Negro. His new album, Phaser, is out now, including the song LFO, Lupe Finds Oliveros. So in the end, after spending an hour and a half with Roberto, he did answer my question about his prolific creative life. Turns out, Helado Negro's practice is just him showing up to do what he loves, what he's good at, what he's had success at. Plain and simple. And yes, there's deeper history stirred up in there, but Roberto has made peace with who he is, what his path is. Then I step back just a bit further and I wonder, so what about me? Is this what it means to be a workaholic? It's a weird label with a little bit of shame attached to it, but it's not far off. Songwriting, recording, music videos, multiple community projects, podcasts, radio, talks, teaching. I have trouble taking days off. I have trouble stopping. Not on weekends, not even on vacation. Like Roberto, it is also just who I am, but there's more mixed up in there. I think to myself, so what happens when immigrant work tendencies match how the American economy wants all of us to behave? Quickly, I realize I am not at peace with this. My mind flashes to that book, Rest as Resistance, and how much I still have to unlearn. I think about how many of my ancestors were not even allowed space to rest, and here I am doing it to myself. Why? But then I get an idea for a song, and off to the studio I go. I'm not gonna solve it today, I guess. Just for this moment, when I am in my turmoil, maybe I should take a walk around the block and throw on a Helado Negro song and let his gentle vibrato, along with his calm acceptance of self, invite me into a daydream. Movement is produced by Ian Koss and myself, Meklit. Our co-creator and podcast godmother is Julie Kane. Our broadcast partner is The World. We are supported by the Mellon Foundation and distributed by PRX. If you enjoyed this story, consider sending it to a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Believe me, this stuff really does help people find the show. And if you happen to be curious about my albums or performances, you can learn more at meklitmusic.com. That's MEKLIT music.com. Movement will be back with new episodes every Tuesday through the summer and fall.